Tim, how are you today?
I'm good. The more that I thought about it, like it depends how far back you're willing to go. Like if you talk about like the 100-foot field you played on when you're like 6, yeah, I hit some home runs. But I figured in a major league press conference that probably wasn't what they were looking for.
Were you worried about the follow-up there from Rob? Him asking where you hit the home run and then having to tell him that you were going all the way back to Little League?
I didn't even think that deeply into it. I figured just respond, and it's not usually you're not usually called on to respond to questions in press conferences, so it was a little different than usual. And actually, the next morning, I walked into the clubhouse, and Rob Thompson's not usually like in the clubhouse, but he was standing in there talking to somebody, and he just goes, "There he is, homerless."
I love that. Rob now just berating you for your lack of home runs in your life. But it was a fun exchange, and it would be a lot more fun to be talking Phillies today if we had a fun game to talk about from last night. So I just want to start with the bigger picture here of another loss in Citi Field for this group. What is it about the trip to New York and this Mets team that you think they are just unable to just mentally overcome it?
Well, I mean, they've had stretches like this at other stadiums. The first 4 or 5 years of Truist Park, they really struggled. They had certainly a period where they couldn't play in Miami, and I generally think these are coincidental and they solve itself. But they have unquestionably struggled mightily at Citi Field recently, and I don't know if there's one thing you can point to and say this needs to be different. Through the first 3 or 4 innings of the game yesterday, it looked like that was, if anyone was going to win 13-3, it was going to be the Phillies. So they just got to get back, hope no cleats get stuck in the ground, and that there's not 15-minute delays for cameras in center field tonight, and hope for the best.
So last night you obviously saw just the way everything unraveled for Christopher Sanchez. After the game, Bryce Harper's talked about potentially the idea of tipping pitches. What did you see in the start for Sanchez?
Yeah, it did seem like after that moment where his cleat got stuck in the ground that things just weren't the same for him. I don't think it's a huge cause for concern. It just wasn't a great outing. Now, I tend to think, and I just wrote an article about this on Pattison, the NL Cy Young Award race, if you're still clinging onto that, probably not going to happen. Like, he might finish second, but Paul Skeens is going to run away with it. But I still think people should generally feel really good about Christopher Sanchez as the ace. Obviously, when Christopher Sanchez was the number 2 to Zach Wheeler, it was even better. But Sanchez is still one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's probably been a top 5 pitcher this year. Just wasn't a great outing last night, but overall still been a tremendous season.
And again, this is one start, so not to overreact to the Christopher Sanchez start from last night. But I had a conversation with someone last week. We had a caller to the station earlier today that got the idea of just the lack of postseason experience and now how much more is on Christopher Sanchez's shoulders. How do you think, being someone that's obviously been around him and covered this team, how do you think he handles maybe the weight of now having to be the ace for this Phillies team?
I think he's 100% capable of handling it, and maybe he wasn't 2 years ago. Like, you can see the presence with him has kind of changed. He's always been pretty stoic, but there is more of like a quiet confidence now, and I think he's capable of handling that. Again, you would rather have Zach Wheeler's number 1 and Christopher Sanchez's number 2, but there's a lot of teams, including teams that are going to be in the playoffs, that would be ecstatic to have Christopher Sanchez taking the ball for them in Game 1.
Someone that we are not ecstatic to see take the mound for the Phillies at this point is Jordan Romano. What is his, I don't want to necessarily call it long-term, but I guess future, as it looks the rest of the season with this team following what we saw last night?
Well, he hadn't pitched in close to a week, so for those upset with Rob Thompson, like that's pretty indicative of him being aware of how poorly this has gone, and clearly he is aware. He didn't sign Jordan Romano, and it probably hasn't entirely, if at all, been his decision to keep Jordan Romano to this point. There was a month of May where Jordan Romano looked excellent. He does have a history of having been a really good reliever, but I agree. Probably for the last month, it has been clear, if not longer, but for the last month, it has certainly been clear. Whatever they thought they had a chance to kind of salvage in the second half of the season, it hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. So whether they move on from him, I don't know. They've kept him in Kepler this year after moving on from a bunch of high-priced one-year signings during the season the last few years. So I'm inclined to think that's a decision above Rob Thompson and maybe even above Dave Dombrowski. But I do think it's getting to the point with Romano where you can't justify it. And frankly, it's been at that point. But it's getting to the point where even if you wanted to dig your heels in on it and just power through, I don't think you can do that anymore.
We're talking to Tim Kelly of On Pattison, covers the Phillies. Where could they go after moving on from Romano? What do you see as the logical move within the organization if they were to decide, you know what, it's time to just end this experiment?
Well, I have to look at the exact amount of days Max Lazar has been down, but I think he's the obvious one to call back up whenever he's eligible to come back up. Alan Ronhill's a guy at AAA that's pitched some innings for you. So at this point, when you have an 8.5 ERA, it almost doesn't matter. No, you're not going to get worse than that most likely. So, and the guy you bring up is probably not going to be somebody that is pitching the eighth inning for you in the postseason. But it's deflating when Jordan Romano comes onto the mound at this point. And it's not to say he hasn't worked hard or been a good teammate or anything like that, but it's just been a disaster of a season. And you almost feel bad for him to a degree at this point that, like, you're continuing to put him into this situation. So I think for all parties involved, a clean break is probably what's best.
And let's keep it conversation with what's going on the mound. This is a two-part for you. First, if it was up to you at this current moment, what would your postseason rotation look like? And what would you hope that this looks like in 6 weeks for the Phillies based on whatever we get the rest of the way from this rotation?
Well, if it was up to me, or if I'm talking about what you hope in 6 weeks, you hope Aaron Nola pitches well enough that he can be your Game 2 starter. Right now, though, I don't think you're yet at that point, although he looked much better in his most recent start. I get it's maybe not ideal to have 3 straight lefties to open a series, but those are your best pitchers right now. I think you roll with it. You break up Sanchez and Luzardo. Ranger Suarez is a lefty, but very different pitcher than those two. So I think you go Sanchez Game 1, Ranger Suarez Game 2, Jesus Luzardo Game 3, and you go from there.
And you talked about the hope of Nola getting himself to be that Game 2 starter. If Nola works his way into that rotation, would that bump Suarez back to Game 3 for you?
Yeah, I would have to look at the exact layout of the series because depending on when you start Ranger Suarez or when he's scheduled to make a start, maybe he's available out of the bullpen. If he's going to pitch Game 3 or 4, maybe he's able to come in and pitch in relief in Game 1 if you need him. So that would kind of be how I determine it. They have liked to break up Sanchez and Luzardo this year, so that's something to keep in mind, but maybe not as important if you have Nola in between. So certainly Sanchez is Game 1, and after that I still think a lot of it's up for grabs. The fortunate part for you is that Jesus Luzardo has been really good the last month, and Ranger Suarez is the NL Player of the Week. So he had a really good homestand after a pretty disastrous start to the second half.
All right, and let's take you to what they're calling a rotation, and it's the outfield. I know you and I, outside of these airwaves, have talked plenty about what they're doing with this outfield and some of the conversations that they're having within that organization. What do you see right now in the way they're managing this outfield, and do you anticipate this being the plan the rest of the way?
I do anticipate it being the plan the rest of the way, and I asked Rob Thompson that last week, and he said yes. I think at this point, Justin Crawford is probably 2026. That can change, but that's my guess for now, that these are the 5 you're rolling with, and I think it's really up for grabs. Brandon Marsh is going to play against right-handed pitchers, but if you get in a series against lefties, I don't think you're going to see him a ton. Nick Castellanos is clearly no longer someone that's just penciled in every single day. To me, I think Harrison Bader is such a good defender in center field and provides enough offensively that your best lineup might just be with him in center field every day, and then platooning Marsh and Kepler in left field, and in right field then going with Castellanos and Kepler in right field, and then in left field, Kepler and Weston Wilson. So I know people don't like platoons. Platoons, though, are not unique to the Phillies. The Dodgers platoon, like lots of other teams, are going with different lineups based on whether you have righties or lefties. And the Phillies don't, in my mind, have like outfielders right now. They don't have Julio Rodriguez or Ronald Acuna or someone that is good enough or productive enough that you just pencil them in every day right now. So for the time being, this is what makes the most sense.
I am eternally grateful for you mentioning that you think Bader should be an everyday center fielder. I'm just collecting at this point Phillies beats that align with that one because Todd Zalecki last week validated my viewpoint on that. You validated that today for me on that. I appreciate you doing that service for me so I can replay that audio 6 more times throughout today's show. The last thing I have for you, looking at the NL East, we had this conversation last week. Kevin Cooney was on with me, and we went back and forth over just how you declare a race over. And obviously, with the way this series has started, would anyone be surprised if it's only a 4-game lead by the end of this series come Wednesday night? I don't think so. When you look at the chances to take this division, how much further do the Phillies have to take this before you feel comfortable that they are going to be the NL East champs?
Well, if the Phillies had swept this series, I would have felt pretty comfortable about it. Obviously, the Phillies famously or infamously, depending on your perspective, were 7 back with 17 to go in 2007 and erased it. But stuff like that doesn't really happen. And also, in today's world, whoever didn't win the division would have just been a wild card winner, so it wouldn't have meant as much. But I think they have to be 7 or 8 up heading into September, and they're in a really good situation if they are that. It's difficult to call it over, but I think if the Phillies win these next 2 out of 3, it's pretty close to over. You're talking 90% chance to win the division. So I would be really shocked at this point if the Mets end up winning the NL East, but the Phillies have to take care of business these next 2 days. They had a chance yesterday to kind of step on their throats, and they didn't do it.
They did not do that, and if any of the show is shown so far, still not thrilled about everything I had to watch last night unfold, and not thrilled about the way they're playing up in New York, but always thrilled to talk to you, Tim. Appreciate you making the time for us.
All right, for sure. Thanks, Ray.
Tim Kelly of On Pattison joining us there to talk some Phillies, break down what he had to say. 2 things I loved it. The last 2 questions. Mentioned Harrison Bader is an everyday guy for this team because of the defense. Love that. Even splits. Put him out there every day. And 2 or 3, you feel like it's over. What did we say yesterday, Sean Rodman?
2 or 3. Feel like it's over.
And now I have to wait till Thursday to make that call. They couldn't just take the first 2 of the series and us show up tomorrow and declare it. Nope. Couldn't do it for you. Oh, well, coming up, he mentioned the Bader thing every day when I asked him about it. The outfield. What does it look like? Tim Kirchin was on with the morning show yesterday. We'll play what he had to say about the platoons, and let's break down what we expect from this outfield the rest of the way. I'm Ray Dunn, taking you through middays right here, 97.5 The Fanatic. Hey, it's Ray Dunn from the Midday Show. Thank you so much for watching our content. If you want more videos, you can click right here. Or how about you subscribe right here so you stay in the know on all that's coming from 97.5 The Fanatic.